Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will present some points and somewhat of a summary of some of the parts of Tosfos Dibur Maschel Pashat Balabayas Es Yodoi. Let's begin. So here we're going to just present an overview of some points. One of the points in Tosfos is that the Avon told us in general versus the Avon told us when it comes to Eitzah. In general, for something to be considered an Av and a Tulda by Shabbos, an Av is simply something that was performed in the Mishkan, and a Tulda is anything that's basically similar to it. However, by Shabbos, the Av needs to be, number one, written in the Torah, and number two, it also had to be performed in the Mishkan. And in order to be classified as a Tulda, it needs one of three conditions. Either it needs to be performed in the Mishkan, number two, it needs to be halacha l'moshe misinai, or number three, it needs to be exactly the same. It's not enough that it's similar. It has to be basically exactly the same as the Av. And now we'll present an example of each one of those. Something that was in the Mishkan and therefore it's a Tulda, something that's halacha l'moshe misinai, that it's asur in a Torah, person's chai for doing it on Shabbos. And the third example is something which is exactly the same as the Av, and therefore it's classified as a Tulda. So the first thing is, Moshit was in the Mishkan. Moshit is a Tulda of Hitzah, but it's only a Tulda since it was in the Mishkan, and therefore it's only the exact way that it was in the Mishkan that it's going to be considered a Tulda, and the person will be chayiv for doing it on Shabbos. And therefore, if somebody passed something from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah that was across from it was opposite sides of, let's say, a Rosh Hashanah of a street, if he was Moshit or if he was Zerik, if he passed it over or through it, he'll be Pater, since that's not the way it was done in the Mishkan. It's specifically if both of the Rosh Hashanah were on one side of a street, they were a longer row, separated by Rosh Hashanah, and the person passed it, he was Moshit from one to the other, not if he threw it, specifically if he passed it, will he be Chayiv, because that's the way it was done in the Mishkan. The Leviim passed the beams from one wagon to another wagon, a longer row. Then the second example we said is halacha l'moshe misinai. For that we have Dalad Amos and Rosh Hashanah. The chiyuv for carrying Dalad Amos and Rosh Hashanah and throwing Dalad Amos and Rosh Hashanah, we learned that it's asur on Shabbos, and a person's chai for doing it on Shabbos, from halacha l'moshe misinai, and it's classified as a Tulda of Eitzah. The third example is that it needs to be exactly the same. It's not enough that it's similar like by the other Tuldas of the other Avis, but it needs to be exactly the same. And an example for that would be Hachnasa. And like the Gemara says, Mali afuke mali ayule. What is it to me if he's taking it out of the Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah? What's it to me if he's bringing it into the Rosh Hashanah from the Rosh Hashanah? And to point something out, that they're so similar, they're even more similar than the Hachnasa, than the Hitzah of the Balabais to the Eitzah of the Ani. Over there, they're not exactly the same, and therefore we wouldn't know one from the other. Whereas over here, they're basically exactly the same. It's Mali Afuke, Mali Ayule. It's doing the same thing, just in a different direction. From Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah is the Eitzah, and the Achnas is Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. And the last and final point is just an unrelated item that we learn about in Tosfos, and that is that the Torah puts near one another the parsha that speaks about the Mishkan and the parsha that speaks about Shabbos, and it teaches us that what are the things that are also to do on Shabbos. Those are the things that were performed in the Mishkan. Now we'll move on to another point in Tosfos, and this is basically a chart indicating it's a help for the second part of Tosfos that analyzes what do we need, sort of a continuation of the previous slide. What is needed by Hitzah specifically in order to be classified as an Av and a Tulda? So we're going to go through the Malacha. There's the Malacha, we have Hitzah, we have Achnasa, we have other Tuldas like Moshit, and then we have carrying 4 Amos and Rosh Hashanah. Like we mentioned in the previous slide, we're going to look at what each of them has and why we need it. So for Hitzah has two things. Number one, it's written in the Pasuk, and number two, it was performed in the Mishkan. Why do we need it to be written in the Pasuk? It's since it's a Malacha Grua, this is explained by Mefarshim, we need it in order for it to be an Av. If it wouldn't be written in the Pasuk and it was only done in the Mishkan, we would say it's something done in the Mishkan, but it's not a Malacha. They did many things in the Mishkan that weren't necessarily Malachas. They were walking around. That's not a Malacha. We wouldn't say it's a Malacha only because it's written in the Torah. Do we determine that it's a Malacha? It was performed in the Mishkan. Why do we need that? It's simply there in order that we shouldn't make a mistake and think that it doesn't have to be in the Mishkan. Av doesn't need to be in the Mishkan to be considered an Av, because look, Hitzah is not in the Mishkan. It's still an Av because it's written in the Torah, and therefore anything that is considered a Malacha by Chazal will be asur on Shabbos, even if it wasn't done in the Mishkan. So Hitzah was also done in the Mishkan, and we mentioned that it was done in the Mishkan in order to support the idea that only something which is in the Mishkan, is considered an Av. Now let's move on to Achnasa. Achnasa also has two things. Number one is the Svar, the logic, that it shouldn't be different than Eitzah, like we mentioned, Mali Afuke, Mali Yule. The second thing it has, and we put it in italics, we'll see in a moment why, that the Achnasa of the poor man was in the Mishkan. And the Gemara makes mention of it, that they brought the beams from the ground, which is Rosh Hashanah, into the wagons, which is Rosh Hashanah. So we have Achnasa. Why do we need it? And the logic we need it is since it's a Malacha Grua. If not for the fact that it was exactly the same, it wouldn't even be classified as a Tolda. And the second thing, we don't need to mention it. It didn't have to be done in the Mishkan. We just mentioned it in the Gemara, since it mentioned that Eitzah was in the Mishkan and where it was. It also mentioned that Achnasa was in the Mishkan and where it was. But the truth is, it's not necessary. So the only thing we need is the first one. That's why the second one's in italics. Other told us an example that we have in our Tosfos is Moishit. That had to be performed in the Mishkan. Why does it need to be performed in the Mishkan to be a Tolda? Because since it's a Malacha Grua, so if not for the fact that it was in the Mishkan, it wouldn't even be classified as a Tolda. And the last one is carrying Dal Amish and Rosh Hashanah. It's Allah al Sinai, and the reason, like we mentioned, is since it's a Malacha Grua, therefore it's necessary to be, if it's not in the Mishkan, it's not exactly the same, then it's going to have to be Allah al Sinai, otherwise we wouldn't classify it even as a Tolda. And what that basically is a summary of the point of a few of the points in Tosfos.